Hello, and welcome to Writers Group Therapy.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Roshni. We're writers helping writers with whatever writing ailments you might have.
Whether it's related to your craft or your career, we can help.
Are you ready for your session?
The doctors are in. Welcome to Writers Group Therapy. I'm Tom, and my cup runneth over today with guests because not only do I have a guest to interview, but I have a guest host. Sam Gasch is sharing the hosting duties with me today. Sam has previously been a guest here as he is a screenwriter and the host of the brilliant podcast Ideal Remake. Glad to have you here, Sam.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
The guest we'll be interviewing today is, so no one thinks us too Hollywood-centric, is from England by way of New Zealand. Paul Kalburgi is an award-winning British screenwriter, playwright, and television producer. His plays such as Broadway or Bust and In the Tall Grass have graced the stages in New York City, London, and Dallas. He received his MA for writing for stage and screen from Regent's University in London and also studied story analysis through the writers program at UCLA. Wow, that's a lot of intro. He conducts playwriting courses and workshops and is the author of the Writer's Toolkit, exercises, techniques, and ideas for playwrights and screenwriters. And he is the host of the Writer's Toolkit podcast, which is a wonderfully produced show, I have to say. Welcome to the podcast, Paul.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I feel like some of the intros I've been giving, I need like a whole second podcast just to contain all of the intro.
Oh,
yeah.
Do you know I record all my intros after the guest is gone because I could never get through it.
You never? Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Well, we'll talk about your podcast
Sure.
in a little bit, but let's start with.
Genuinely never occurred to me. That is a very good idea.
That's great. It's less embarrassing too.
Well, feel free to edit as you will. I'm sure I'll make lots of fluffs as well.
That's okay. We're all podcasters here.
And say and listen to that. There will be no fluffs.
This is going to be a weird podcast. So we're just going to run it as is. I'm not even going to edit it all. It's just going to be as is.
Okay, great.
All right. So first, let's just talk about your writing. So you have you've written plays and TV shows, and what is your drive behind your writing? When did you start, and why plays too?
Well, I kind of it was always theatre first for me, and I originally trained as an actor in the northeast of England, where I'm from, and moved to London about 19, and started auditioning for things, and never really kind of found the right role for myself. And I thought, I'm going to write the perfect role for myself. And then through writing kind of really found, I guess, my real passion. I think sometimes when you are perhaps from a small town and you first enter the industry, I think acting sometimes is the obvious route or the only route that you're really aware of until you really kind of find your feet and investigate the industry and kind of figure out, there are other roles available and all that stuff that makes it onto stage and screen. Somebody actually writes that. So through doing that, I kind of organically segued into writing, and then I actually put together a four-hander comedy sketch show on the Fringe in London with some other writer friends. And it was a mixed media show. It was half live on stage and half pre-recorded video content. And then through kind of recording and producing all the video content, I kind of found my way into TV production, which has been my day job, I guess, for the last 15 years. But writing has always kind of been my main passion, kind of alongside that. So I went back to school in 2015 and decided to take it a bit more seriously and really kind of try to push the writing, which is when I went back to Regent's to do my MA in writing for screen and stage. So theatre's been my first love, and writing for stage, and then I guess screenwriting kind of came through working in television and after my course really.
That's your story is remarkably similar to mine, and I find that hilarious and amazing. But so I sat and I listened to the soundtrack to your musical Broadway or Bust yesterday.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I listened to the whole thing. And I specifically the song We're Sorry, Miss Spats.
Right.
That's the sort of song that like only someone who's been in the like audition train could write.
Yes.
It's so good. It's so good.
It's every actor's lament, isn't it?
Oh, so much. It like if anyone's listening right now, if go check out all of Paul's songs, but start with "We're Sorry, Miss Spats" because it is absolutely fantastic.
Well,
I will have to check that out. Yeah.
yeah, well, that show, I guess, really speaks to my origins in theatre, coming up through community theatre. I always think, and I always say to my students as well in my workshops, that I feel like we all have one show in us that we have to write. There's lots of shows that we'd like to write and that we have ideas to write, but there's kind of a show we have to get out there on the page, and whether it makes it to stage or not. And that one actually took 14 years to make it to stage, and then perhaps at the end I wish that it hadn't, which is another story. But that was the show that for me I had to write, and it was basically my love letter to theatre. It was all the characters that I came up with in community theatre, and I thought, moving to Dallas in 2015 from London, I thought those characters were unique to my experience in the northeast of England. And I was taking my children, I've got two small boys, and I was taking them to the library. This is in Plano, Texas, just outside of north of Dallas. And I was in a library in somewhere that felt so far from a million miles from where I came from. And there was a poster on the wall for Theatre Britain, a British theatre company in Plano, Texas. And I thought, what are the chances? So I reached out to Theatre Britain, and it was immediately apparent that all those characters that I was kind of writing about from my start in theatre were right here in Texas, right there in Texas rather, and I thought maybe that show could have legs elsewhere beyond the northeast of England where it's from, and that was Broadway or bust really. So it's just my kind of passionate love letter to amateur theatre, all the characters that make it happen, and the magic that comes from community of theatre, because it's all about the people. They're not trying to stage a theatrical masterpiece. It's about the journey. It's about community, and that's what that show was for me.
And that very much comes across in the music. It was genuinely wonderful. And the summer before I went to college, I was involved in a community theater, a dinner theater in Tucson, Arizona, which is where I'm from, called the Gaslight Theater. And just listening to the music just took me right back there. And it was like very much of like, just a total nostalgia hit while listening.
Oh, fantastic. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You guys are having a great conversation. I'll just let you go. No, that's cool. Roshni's always telling me about, and we've talked about this on the podcast, about acting for writers is like a thing. Like if you're a writer and you've never done acting, it's a little harder to get into the head of the character and how it's performed to know how to write it properly. Because there's how we think we want the actor to say it, or we think we want how the character to behave, but it's not natural. And only an actor would understand some of that stuff. Until the actor says it and feels it and tries to present it, they're not going to understand how writing it is a little harder. So
you've got to hear the voice, absolutely. Hear it instinctively in order to write it authentically, I think.
You have TV stuff you've written. I noticed it's a lot of you have drama, but you also have biographies, docudramas, reality series. Yeah. That seems like a little bit different area.
Yeah, well, everything other than
where did that come about?
So the non-scripted content, I started off the back of that show I mentioned earlier with the mixed media show on stage. I actually set up a TV production company. This was in 2006. And possibly with the bravado of youth, set up this TV production company and self-funded a 6-part celebrity reality series without the backing of a network. There was no platform for this show. I just had it in my head that I could do it, and with a very, very minimal shoestring budget, I enlisted the celebrity, found myself a crew, and made this 6-part series. And then 2 years later was sat there with a fully edited show and no home for it. And I'd been kind of knocking on doors, and I'd pretty much exhausted not just the mainstream terrestrial channels in the UK, but I'd also worked my way down the Wikipedia list of every single channel on the Sky platform, and had pretty much exhausted the lot. And then I came across this wonderful network called Information TV that basically provides a platform for micro channels to launch on their television channel. And they were launching a new channel at the time called Showcase TV, and they agreed to take the show from me. So there was no money involved. We didn't recoup at all, but they took the show and they aired it. And at that point, I was just glad to find a home for it, which felt like quite the accolade in itself. And what happened was the show aired, and my phone kept ringing with other small micro channels that didn't have in-house production facilities. And I found myself for the next 5 years producing content for these really niche audience shows that I wasn't necessarily passionate about content wise, but it felt like a great start in TV. So I was making shows for the Business Channel and UK Boating, and would you believe it, the Caravan Channel. So really kind of niche market TV shows. And then I kind of wound down that company, spent 3 years working in home shopping, and around the time I was studying for my master's degree. And then once I'd graduated, I thought, okay, this is the time to kind of make a real change here. And fortunately, my move to Dallas brought about some great opportunities, and that was where I was able to find work writing on shows like The Price of Fame, and we did recently an authorized biodoc about Clint Eastwood, and kind of started to move into scripted content.
That's incredible. That sounds super fun. And just like it's one of those opportunities where normally writing for TV is kind of the thing itself, and then you have to go elsewhere to get the experience so you can write more TV. But it sounds like you found this incredible niche where you were writing for TV and getting more experience to write for TV at the same time.
Yeah, it was a funny way about it. I kind of came up backwards really, and because I bypassed a lot of the early kind of entry point roles in television. I was never really a runner or a researcher. I kind of went straight in producing, which is a funny thing to do, because of course your CV doesn't really back that up when you're looking for your next role. So the early years were definitely hard because of that. I think I went perhaps too far ahead of myself and had to kind of work back.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Yeah. You have an interesting perspective because you started in London, you've worked in Dallas, you were in LA because you I don't know how much you did in LA. You have to tell me about that. But then now you're in New Zealand. So how does the industry differ in all those different places? What have you found the most compelling differences?
Very different, yeah. London was great because I was there. I spent 15 years in London, and it was obviously the earlier part of my career. So in terms of the access to experimental platforms and fringe venues and places to really be play and be messy, and get stuff on stage relatively easily without a great deal of funding, was a fantastic learning environment, and to really meet many of my network and community of writers that I'm still in touch with today. And then moving to the US was always a dream of mine. I would still love to return to the US, and what I found was, in London, probably very similar to New York and LA, you're very often, unless you kind of really break through, you're a tiny fish in a really big pond. And suddenly moving to Dallas, knocking on doors, the doors seemed to open. I don't know whether it was the accent that was novel in Texas, but something happened.
Oh, it's always the accent. Yeah.
You think? People replied to emails.
And the talent, Tom, and the talent.
Well, I think perhaps the accent opens the door for sure, and then you've got to back it up. But it was just a surprise. So often you fire off emails and just never hear back, and suddenly people were replying to my emails. I was able to take meetings, and that was really exciting. And perhaps that gave me the confidence to believe that I could do it. So that was really interesting. And New Zealand has been a very different experience. And I've been here predominantly, since the start of COVID, which has been a strange time to be anywhere. So that was strange. Before we left Dallas, I started researching, what might I do in New Zealand? What might I write for? And the kind of the credit that's on everyone's CV here, if you're a writer, is Shortland Street, which is the local soap opera. So before we left Dallas, I spent the last 6 months starting to watch that, because of course it's shot 6 months in advance of airing. So I thought I'd better start catching up and kind of familiarize myself with that, should I be lucky enough to find a way into the show. So when we moved here, that was my first kind of port of call, and let's see how I can perhaps get in on Shortland Street, and I was lucky enough to write a couple of episodes back in 2019, which aired in 2020. So that was a great starting point and a great start in terms of networking as well.
Well, Netflix has been adding more New Zealand series to their catalog. I've actually noticed there's several. Actually, starting several years ago, there were a few New Zealand shows that popped up. Glitch was one. That was a good one. That was like a kind of a paranormal-ish kind of show. And then there was it the Mighty Johnsons? It was like some kind of fantasy thing. Those were kind of the early ones, but now I feel like even since those weren't bad, but they're kind of early. But now it seems like the production quality and the values have really risen.
Yeah, I mean, as long as we're gassing up. Sorry, I'm
go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead, please.
I was gonna say, as long as we're gassing up New Zealand television, I just finished watching the New Zealand version of Taskmaster, which.
Oh really?
Yeah, it's great.
Did the comedy translate?
It did. Well, yeah. I mean, it's interesting people in incredible situations. It translated very well. It was very funny.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on your point, Tom, and just say I think perhaps the reason for that is that for so long, New Zealand has been a bit of a great place to come tax-wise for international production, and so much has been shot here over the years that you wouldn't even know was shot here. There's lots of US movies that come and shoot here for the stunning locale, and I think of recent years, New Zealand has really been cottoning on to perhaps what's on its doorstep and showing the world what it can do locally as well.
I think Netflix has also been putting a lot more money into local production for, that's why we're getting so many, Korean series and you get, Japanese series.
Yeah.
They've got the audience, so they're putting money into local production. And then that's translated into international views. I mean, Squid Game and stuff like that are huge, in the US even. So it feels like Netflix is like, we don't have to just make shows in the US for US people. We can make shows all over the world for all of their audiences, and then see where they'll be popular.
Yeah,
and different countries have different tastes, of course, too.
Well, the co-production model itself has been, I think, going that way for a long time in terms of things like Downton Abbey, which you wouldn't suspect, is primarily or partly at least funded by US TV networks, for the US audience. So I think that co-production model certainly is the way forward. I don't know if you're familiar with the Kiwi comedy writer Rose Matafeo and her show Starstruck, which was a co-production.
I am after having watched New Zealand Taskmaster. Yeah. Actually, I don't think she was on that, but yes, I'm familiar with Rose Matafeo.
Yeah. Well, so Starstruck is I mean, I'm a big fan. I love Starstruck, and that was, it's her story of being a Kiwi transplanted in London, and is co-produced between, I forget the UK network, but it's HBO Max, I believe, and a UK network. And that model, of course, is sold around the world, and it's shared risk for the network, so it certainly makes sense. And I'm trying to pitch a show at the moment with a British kind of protagonist set in New Zealand, and hoping to find funding with that model.
Cool. You're a busy guy, and with all of that, you also have a podcast. The Writer's Toolkit is your podcast, the same title as your book, The Writer's Toolkit. And let's listen to your promo, and then we'll talk about it.
The Writer's Toolkit podcast with Paul Kalburgi.
In the first season, I sit down with veteran Hollywood screenwriters and playwrights working in the West End and on Broadway. I find out how and where they like to work and the writing journeys behind some of their best-known works. So if you write for stage or screen, join us for inspiring conversations about the writing life, as well as tips and ideas for maintaining a healthy writing practice.
The Writer's Toolkit podcast.
So it's so cool. I love it. It's so polished. Do you have a team that work on it with you?
No, it's just me.
It sounds like you must have like engineers, and you have that great voiceover, the announcer lady.
Yeah.
I love it. It's really nice.
I think that's perhaps my TV producer hat. It's hard to take off, and sometimes being a bit of a perfectionist is certainly a curse. I didn't plan on spending as many hours on the podcast as I did.
I also imagine for someone who spends so much time wearing the producer hat and working for so many different productions, it's nice to finally have something that you have complete creative control over for one reason or another.
Oh, that was certainly nice. Yeah, it literally the book kind of started and stopped, and yeah, that was really nice, especially during lockdown. It was a really great way to connect and feel not so cut off from the rest of the world. The podcast itself. So yeah, so I think wearing all of those hats, lining up the guests, speaking to the people that I was really passionate about speaking to, I hope that comes across in the conversations.
Oh yes, I am. I listened to the most recent episode, and I can't remember her name, but she was lovely.
Catherine Burnett,
and
probably.
Catherine,
Yep.
yeah. And there was, I felt like there was it was very, I wasn't going to say inspiring. I don't want to oversell it, but yeah, it was very inspiring, and just the conversation you had with her, very light and easy to listen to. Great storytelling. So I found it really, not just a podcast about writing, but it was more about, being a writer and the trials and tribulations thereof.
Absolutely. It's all about my whole thing was, it's all about the writing life. And if you dive back into episodes, the first episode actually with Diane Samuels, who was actually one of my mentors during my MA at Regent's University, and her workshops were incredibly inspiring to me, because Diane's all about meditative writing and writing kind of playful writing and being messy and allowing yourself that freedom to experiment. So Diane and I have a really kind of spiritual conversation. Then I connect with Mark Sanderson, who's a screenwriter that I've admired for a long time, off the back of his book, A Screenwriter's Journey to Success. And we talk about, life in the trenches in Hollywood as a working writer. And it's all about the kind of day-to-day. I'm very nosy as well. And it was basically an opportunity for me to get into the writing rooms of the writers, that inspire me, and find out kind of not just what they write, but how they write, and kind of, what's on their desk beside them while they're writing, and what music they listen to, and all those kind of quirky, writers' rituals things.
One of my favorite questions that I tend to ask other writers is what they listen to while they're writing. And so, like, because some people need absolute silence, and some people have like those lo-fi beats to study and relax to. So
Yeah.
I guess with that in mind, Paul, for what is your writing ritual? Since you
Yeah.
asked all of your guests that.
Thank you. Well, I actually create a Spotify playlist specific to each of my projects. And I
Ooh, very
find
nice.
that because they're all so different, I find it really allows me to kind of immerse into that world. So I'm working on a piece at the moment which is set in the Arctic Circle, and I have lots of kind of Norse, Scandi kind of, haunting rhythmic kind of music in the background. And then what else am I writing on? Let's have a look. I'm writing a jukebox musical right now. I won't say based on what music, but I have the soundtrack of kind of that, that band's music in the background. And then I have the comedy drama that's set here in New Zealand, which has lots of music, kind of old school jazz. So kind of project specific, but I certainly can't write in silence. I do very well in noisy coffee shops.
So then with that in mind, when you're putting together these Spotify playlists, are these lists that have lyrics or do not have lyrics?
Yeah, some of them do. I know what you're saying there, because like I couldn't have anything that's too distracting. But sometimes, yeah, some of the jazz stuff certainly does have lyrics. Obviously, with the jukebox musical, that it's all driven
Sure.
by the lyrics. But yes, primarily, and if I'm writing something that's not project specific, I would certainly be instrumental, kind of piano in the background. It's a great playlist that I use a lot on Spotify, and I'll just ask my smart speaker to play violin concertos, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So then you also wrote a book. Like, you wrote the Writer's Toolkit. Like, what kind of playlist did you put together for writing the book?
Yeah, so that would be one where I was probably having instrumental kind of classical things in the background, because the book kind of is such a kind of melting pot, kind of crossing all genres and taking bits from things that have kind of worked for me, when writing the different projects that I've worked on. Many of the exercises are from my workshops. So yeah, the soundtrack for writing something, I think, quite generalist, I would probably need to kind of tune out, like you say, lo-fi beats, some kind of white noise.
Totally.
So as well as your podcast, your book, your screenwriting, your playwriting, you also do workshops. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So when I when I graduated from Regent's University in 2015, and it was a real kind of educating Rita moment for me. I don't know if you're familiar with the film, but Educating Rita is about a
Oh yeah.
yeah
Hmm.
yeah a mature student returning to school, and I really kind of embraced, the subculture and everything about going back to school. It was a fantastic time for me. And when I left, I didn't want it to be over. And I was like, I've got to find a way to be back in the room with writers because I love that energy, of kind of sharing ideas, dissecting scenes, screenings, all that kind of stuff was so inspiring to me. So the deadlines that came with, with the master's degree, going away and completing those assignments in between was never a chore. It never felt like a challenge because I was just so engrossed in the whole thing. So I thought, if I'm going to keep up that energy of being able to deliver projects for myself and get my own passion projects and spec scripts written, let me find a way to stay connected with education alongside that as a way to kind of constantly fuel my own inspiration and to be in the room with writers and enthuse about all the things that drive me and also learn from them. So that was kind of the impetus to start teaching and kind of get into the classroom. But my workshops are very practical, very interactive. I'm not a lecturer by any means. I don't stand in front of a whiteboard and spout theory. It's all practical based exercises designed to either provide a jumping off point for a new piece of work, to navigate around a writing roadblock or tackle a problematic scene. And so what I'd found was that after working that way in workshops for a few years, I'd amassed so many original exercises that it felt quite natural to compile them into a book. So that's how the Writer's Toolkit came about.
Ah, okay. Now, are your workshops, do you have to go to New Zealand for those, or do you do them virtually as well?
Well, I travel around. So I've done workshops previously in the US and the UK. Right now, with travel
Okay.
restrictions, for this year, I have workshops coming up just in New Zealand. Actually, sorry, I tell a lie. I'm hoping to teach a workshop in Greece in June, during a Europe
Ah.
trip. But one of the things that I've really hated about the pandemic is this idea that we're all supposed to become overnight YouTubers. And we're all supposed to be confident to suddenly move everything online, and it's just not for me. I just don't enjoy speaking to camera, speaking to black boxes, and I just think I get so much out of being in the room with the writers that and also you just you burn through so much more content when you're not discussing things in the room with people and elaborating on an idea or a theory. I think you just burn through a whole content for a whole workshop very quickly. So no, I've kind of held off moving online, and I know I feel like I should. Everyone keeps telling me to do stuff online, and probably to my own detriment. But
I have a book.
right, there you go.
Well, to that point, like, because you said that the book is kind of based off of these workshops that you've been teaching, and you kind of like assembled it based on that. Since we're now kind of moving towards a post-ish pandemic world, what's something that was true when it was originally written that might not be true anymore, that you think? What's something that's changed that you might, if you were writing the book now, go back and alter?
So I wrote the book pre-pandemic. The book came out pre-pandemic. I was talking just then about not teaching workshops online. Sorry,
Right.
I think I've confused your question.
I'm sorry. I'm asking if there's something, because the book is pre-pandemic, is there something, information and something that you teach in the book
No,
that has changed because of the pandemic?
No, I'm so sorry. No, the book's fairly evergreen. It's all stuff. It's because it's based on writing.
Got it. It's process.
Yeah. So I think the book is all about craft and technique, and the ideas in there can apply to a current piece of writing, a project that you're working on. Can inspire a new piece of work, and can also be used as a kind of precursor to a writing session. So one of the things that I talk about in the book is meditative writing, and there are 3 audio pre-recorded meditations, writing meditations, which you can access through the book, which will guide you through I use these meditations as a way to clear my mind before sitting down for a writing session, and to leave any kind of thoughts from the outside world outside of my writing space, so that I can really kind of sit down to write and immerse myself without any kind of baggage. So it's kind of like almost like a cleansing. So I'll I also talk about using smudge sticks to kind of free the space of any negative energy, and so so all of those things are kind of will work absolutely. There's no change there.
What's a smudge stick?
Oh, so a smudge stick is white sage, which is said to cleanse negative energy from a space. So it's basically a bundle of dried leaves wrapped together in some yarn, and you light it and then put it out very quickly, and use the smoke to kind of cleanse the room that you're writing in. So it's
okay.
Perhaps a bit woo woo for some people, and
I like that idea. I might need to try that. I have too many things going on all at once. I'm constantly jumping from thing to thing. So when I try to write, it's like literally in between two other deadline things. And so I need to do that. I need to like get myself some space and some cleansing so I can focus more.
Got to find your sanctuary and make it kind of work for you, whether that's through candles or music or whatever, incense.
Excellent. Well, that's a nice, pleasant thought to kind of wrap up on. If people want to find out more about you and your book and your projects, where can they find you online?
So I'm at paulkalburgi.com, and from there you'll find the podcast, the Writer's Toolkit podcast, and links for the book as well. Online you'll find me at Paul Kalburgi, and I'd love to connect with writers out there. Everything I'm doing is to inspire fellow writers and enthuse about the craft together. So absolutely, come and find me.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Oh, it's been great. Thank
nice
you so much for inviting me. Yes, thank you, Sam. Thank you.
Do check out the Writer's Toolkit book and podcast. We'll put the links in the show notes to all of Paul's sites and socials. And a special thanks to you, Sam, for guest hosting today's show. Check out Ideal Remake wherever you listen to podcasts. It's a lot of fun. Until next time, keep writing.